My husband has been begging me for an ugly sweater long sleeve t-shirt for about a year now, and we are super excited that we found this really fun fabric that we're going to make it out of. Hi, I'm Christina, and I love to digitally apparel pattern, creating unique sewing patterns so that I can create amazing pieces of wearable art out of some fun fabric. So today I am making a long sleeved kind of ugly sweater-esque shirt. If you're interested in the pattern, you can definitely find it down below as well as the instructions. And let's get sewing. The first thing I always like to do is wash and dry my fabric the way that I will be wanting to wash and dry the garment. That way it has done all the pre-shrinking it wants to do. Then we're going to pull up Illustrator and we're going to resize it to what I already have documented. If you want to see how you can resize your Illustrator board, you can check out this video up here that is linked. Then I just like to double check that all my squares are lining up and it looks good. I'm going to then take away my inch by inch grid and pull out my fabric. I'm going to lay this down, and the one thing that I want to note is when you are cutting out a pattern like this, you're definitely going to have to pattern match. And the very first pattern I cut, I wasn't looking or paying attention quite, so that made me actually on the rest of them have to kind of futz a little bit more. So as I am now trying to cut my second pattern piece, I'm trying to line up my pattern, which as I'm moving the fabric around, I am realizing to actually line this pattern up perfectly, I don't have enough room at the very top of the fabric. So I'm going to have to kind of move around my fabric because the repeat on this is kind of long. So I am wasting a little bit more fabric than I was really wanting to. I should have dropped my pattern a little bit more in the first place and I wouldn't have had this many problems. But it is essential that when you are cutting out something with a pattern like this, that you are paying attention to where that pattern meets if you want to make sure you have a nice matching pattern all the way around. Now that I'm done with the bodice, it is on to the sleeve. So I am going to lay out my sleeve and I'm going to think a little bit more and check a little bit more before I actually cut this one out so that I know that as I cut out its matching pair that I will actually have a good, I won't have to hopefully go as crazy with it. So instead of actually lining up the fabric this time, lining up the pattern on the fabric this time, what I'm going to do is I am actually going to just line up my pattern so that the right sides are together, lining up those patterns so that they match perfectly side to side. That is the easiest way you can actually pattern match. Is you cut one out, you flip it over, you match it up, and then you cut your other one out. Now it's time for me to cut out this cuff, and I decided I really love the way these little reindeers look. So I'm going to cut it out so that on the fold, you'll see all the little reindeers and I'm not worried about the other half. I'm going to do the exact same thing, line up those reindeers just a little bit more, and cut there. Then the last thing I need to cut out is the bias for the neckline. And I loved these little hollies. So I wanted to do some double checking to make sure that I could fold those little hollies and that would help, determine the size of my pattern. I moved the rest of the patterns off of my screen so they weren't distracting me. And then I started to line up that fabric so that the hollies would be the seam portion of that fabric. And I cut out the size of neckband I needed. There we go, testing it out, making sure it looks good. Now that I have all my fabric cut out, it is time to move to the serger. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to serge my cuffs into their little circles. I won't be using these right away, but I like to always, serge these first. So I'm just folding them in half and serging the seam together so that I can then fold it and get ready to serge the rest. Next, we're going to serge the shoulder seams. So on one shoulder seam, I'm actually only going to go about 3/4 of the way. That way I can finish up the neck binding nice and cleanly. So I'm going to leave about 1/4 of it open. And then on the other shoulder seam, I'm going to go all the way across. Next, we're going to be inserting the sleeves. So I pinned mine on so that they would be nicely gathered on. They are slightly different. There's about 3/4 of an inch ease. When you are pinning and using a serger, I always like to pin far enough away that my pins don't touch the foot at all. So I have no worry about running over them or getting them caught in my machine. It is essential that you actually try and make sure that you're pinning far enough away so that you don't have any problems. So now I am sewing in the other sleeve so that I have both sleeves sewn in first. Now that I have those two sleeves in, we are going to do the under sleeve seam and the side seams all in one go. So we're going to start at the hem of my shirt and go up the side seam. And then once you get to the armpit, you want to make sure that those seam allowances are going in opposite directions, so it makes a little bit nicer of a feed through your sewing machine. And then I'm going to go down my underarm sleeve. So you want to make sure as you are sewing, you are actually ensuring that that pattern is matching up the way you want. Next, I'm going to sew the cuff onto this shirt. So my cuff is smaller than my shirt, so I'm going to be stretching my cuff as I am serging the shirt onto it. This will help kind of gather it down and make it look nice and crisp. There we go. Happy little seam right there. We'll be cover stitching that in a little while. And this is when I realized I doubled up my reindeer, but the reindeers are really cute. So now we are sewing up the other side seam and underarm seam, ensuring that our pattern matching is lining up, that the seams at the underarm or armpit are going in opposite directions, and then down the underarm seam. Again, making sure that those patterns are matching up the way you want them to be. There we are. We're going to flip it right side out now, and we're going to serge the cuff on again. So again, we're going to have that folded cuff. We're going to match up our seam allowances so that they're together, and then we're going to serge it on. Once again, stretching our cuff onto the hem of our sleeve to give it that nice little gather in effect. Next, we are moving on to the neckband. So I am going to fold my neckband in half, ensure that my hollies are going towards the shirt. So that will depend on which way you actually sew around. And once I have it folded in half and I'm on the neckband, I am pulling my neckband just a little bit so that it is actually gathering in the shirt below to make sure that your neckband is nice and tight and doesn't get too loosey-goosey. And I'm just serging all the way around until I get to the opposite end. I'm going to make sure I'm serging off and then cut it and cut my neckband to length. Next, we're actually going to finish sewing up our shoulder seam. So I'm going to start halfway through the shoulder, making sure that that neckband is lining up the way I want it to go. And then I'm going to do my back stitching serging trick that if you want to see that, make sure you check out the video up there on how you can also do a serging back stitching trick. And there we go. Look at that. Nice and crisp. Now it's time to do all the finishing and all the finishing stitches. So I'm going to start by ironing up my hem because I'm going to be using a cover stitch to finish off this shirt. You can also just serge everything and zigzag in all these places, but I want to use a cover stitch to make it look nice and crisp. So once I have it ironed up and prepped, I'm going to move over to my cover stitch machine and I'm going to line up with my guide line. And I'm going to cover stitch all the way around the bottom hem. and I'm all the way around. So I'm going to pull out that fabric, pull out the threads and give them a nice clip. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to serge the cuff serging down. So I'm going to pull out the little extension on this on the cover stitch so I can actually get my cuff fed around there. I'm going to ensure that my serging is folded up towards the sleeve and not down towards the hem. And I'm going to serge that I'm going to cover stitch that serging up so that it's not causing a line, but it's actually sewn down and holding the serging in place. Look at how nice that looks. Now it's time to do the other sleeves. Same thing, I'm going to feed on my cuff. I'm going to make sure my serging is facing up towards the sleeve, and I'm going to cover stitch all the way around, securing that serging in place. This is just one of those steps that takes your homemade garments just enough more to that next level. Now it's on to the neckband. Same thing, I'm going to make sure the serging is facing down towards the garment instead of up towards the neckline. And I'm going to I'm going to cover stitch my serging all the way around the neck. There we go. I am so happy how this turned out. I think my husband looks super cute in this outfit, and I am excited to go out and spread some Christmas joy with him. And here we have it. His ugly sweater long sleeve t-shirt is done. Now there are a few things that I would definitely want to change on this guy. I definitely would have watched the pattern at the cuff and not done double reindeers, but at the same time the double reindeers is kind of cute. That's always the fun you have when you are pattern matching with fabric. You have a lot of decisions you have to make, and you have to be careful when you're sewing and when you're cutting. Actually, you have to be even more careful when you're cutting than when you're sewing. But it's just kind of all those bring together to create this really cute sweater on my actual husband. He is so excited. So happy. If you're interested in this pattern, you can find it down below, and I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy sewing!